Hi, everyone. I'm Paul Shearer with Denovo, Vice President of Solution Architecture, and with me today is Julie Morrison. Julie, you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, Julie Morrison with Denovo. I'm Senior Director of JDE Applications.
And we're here today to talk to you about a new Denovo program called LaunchPerfect. Just jumping right in, what is LaunchPerfect? So LaunchPerfect is a methodology that Denovo has developed for flawless, or at least as close to flawless upgrades as you're likely to find. So how does the program work? So it starts with a no cost assessment. So one of the things that Denovo is known for, we're laser focused on, is JD Edwards. We live, breathe JD Edwards every day. So the first thing that we do is take basically all of this knowledge. We come in and we assess your environment for four key areas. So the first is taking a look at what the technical debt is. We take a look at the economic realities that you're living in today. So sometimes the art of the possible is constrained by that technical debt that you already have. And the reality is there are things that we'd all like to do, but again, those economic realities often will constrain an organization. So where you might prefer one solution, you're looking at a different solution. Performance is a huge consideration. What is acceptable to the business? What's the impact of the business when performance is suboptimal? Worked with an organization in the past where literally performance gains that we were able to deliver to them resulted in them being able to get rid of a third shift. So all of the work that previously they were doing over three shifts, they were now accomplishing within two shifts. They joked that it was the first IT project in their history that ever had a positive number on the balance sheet. And then availability. So how often or what percentage of the time do you need this application up, online, and available? What's the impact to your organization when it's not? So jumping into kind of this technical debt a little bit, we're still in this assessment phase. What are the things that we're looking to understand? A couple things. One of the low-hanging fruit areas, and this is an area a lot of organizations are in trouble with, is just your operating systems. Right now, in the threat environment that we're all operating, everyone is extremely focused on what are the vulnerabilities that are out there. It's probably several times a year I hear about JD Edwards installations being victims of ransomware attacks, where the systems get compromised, data gets exfiltrated, systems get encrypted, and they're being asked to pay a ransom to some bad actor that's out there. A lot of times those vulnerabilities are directly caused by operating systems being out of date. Another area that we look at are the databases. From a minimum technical requirement standpoint, where are you with the database? WebLogic, web servers. This is one of the things where if you're not taking your Oracle patches on at least a quarterly basis, and this is especially true of organizations that put JD Edwards out on the internet so that you can hit it directly, you're playing Russian roulette with your organization. Every quarter, there are CVEs that are out there that have a ranking of 9 or higher. What that means is that these exploits are happening in the wild. Your systems can be compromised without credentials. Really serious threats that you need to be aware of, that you need to mitigate. And then lastly, JD Edwards itself. How long has it been since you've upgraded this system? Are there a lot of new things, maybe new technologies related to Orchestrator, et cetera, that you're not able to take advantage of because you're running on a older release of JD Edwards? Double clicking on JD Edwards itself. One of the areas that we look at is what is going to be the impact from a project standpoint of getting you code current. Julie, you want to talk about this a little bit?
Sure. So we've got some UEEs that we run over your system to determine what kind of customizations you have. So there might be customizations to your base objects. You might have created a copy and there are 55 type objects, but we run through all of that to see how many of those objects are affected by the current release you're on versus the new release that you're going to. So we make sure that we go through all of this. And if we need to do an assessment, we can work through here's customizations that we have. Maybe a new vanilla feature has replaced that. So we do a deep dive on all the customizations that you have in your system.
And the goal is whenever we can to get your system back to a vanilla state. There's a lot of things that maybe 15 years ago were very appropriate because of gaps within JD Edwards itself. Those gaps have either been resolved or in a lot of cases, there's just better ways of handling the uniqueness of your organization that doesn't require customization. Julie, I think you were telling me the other day, there's a lot of stuff that you're replacing customizations with orchestrations these days.
That's correct, because there's a lot of embedded features with orchestrations. If you've done a customization to add or remove a field on an interactive screen, you can do that now with orchestrations and leave the base object as vanilla.
Yeah, and it doesn't even get into what you can do with personalizations now, where a lot of stuff used to require modifying the code, where users are now able to just self-service that stuff and you can retire those customizations. But part of what we're doing here is we're really understanding when we do this project, what's the impact to your organization? If you're already pretty vanilla, it's going to be a very straightforward project in terms of upgrading. The more customizations you have and the more modifications, for instance, of base JD Edwards objects, the more impactful this is going to be. So in this particular example, we've got a general ledger and the customer has copied it and made a P57 version off of it. We're able to tell that base object was originally from 2018. However, there are new ESUs out there for it as of 2020 or 2022. So a whole bunch of fixes that exist in that core object that aren't in the custom object or a code current version of that core object. So this really tells us at a very detailed level what it is that we're going to need to do as part of that project to get you current. One of the other cool things with the way this works now within JD Edwards, the majority of your code, if you're on, I think it's 9.1 update 2 or higher, the majority of your customizations are going to get preserved. They're not going to get overwritten during the process of the upgrade. So even organizations that have extensively modified things, the impact in terms of the development retrofits may not be nearly as involved as you're otherwise thinking. So we take all of this information, looking at where you are from that technical debt standpoint, and we really use it to determine kind of one of two different methodologies for moving to the cloud. Let's say you're already pretty code current. Maybe you're on update 6, update 7, and you're on tools 927 or 928. And your goal as an organization is maybe you've got a data center, maybe you've got a massive amount of CapEx that you're getting ready to spend as an organization. And instead of spending that $1 million on CapEx, you want to move to the cloud. Given that you're already code current and you're wanting to make this happen as quickly as possible, I said you're code current, you're close to code current. In this case, maybe we're going to maybe we're going to go with a lift and shift project. And this is where we're going to really focus on how do we get you out of that data center into the cloud as quickly as possible. The key thing to know with this type of project is whatever technical debt you have, you're going to be moving that along with you into the cloud. And in some cases, depending on how much you have, it can actually serve as an obstacle for keeping you from going to the cloud. Now, we'll contrast that with the move and improve, the one up top. And this is where part of that migration to the cloud, we want to get you as code current as possible. We want to retire all of that technical debt that you have so that when that environment lands on the cloud, you have the maximum amount of shelf life possible. These next two examples are two plans. These are actually from assessments that we've done for various customers where we walk through what that looks like. Julie, you want to talk about a lift and shift and how we would go about that?
Sure. From an application perspective, obviously there's technical stuff on our end to get ready and prepared. But for a lift and shift, really, that's just around the technical connections that are going in. We're not going to touch any of the objects around JD Edwards, so no features will change. Everything should really slide over as is. So you'll notice there's a couple of testing opportunities here. One is unit testing, where we go in and make sure that key programs are working. So can you do a run of payroll? Can you post? Running reports. So it's really just spot unit testing that things have come up and are working. In addition, you've got UAT, which is user acceptance testing, to make sure that all your end users can connect to the new system and run through a day in a life pretty quickly to make sure that everything is working well. But with this environment, we don't expect your end users to notice that there's any difference. When they click on the new URL, it points to a different place, but everything else should look exactly the same.
So the apps versions, the tools versions, it's all no changes there.
Correct.
So contrast that with the move and improve. We can tell just from the font difference on the previous slide, it does appear to be a little bit more involved.
Yep, so we've got some pretty heavy testing cycles for Move and Improve. We've done an upgrade to tools that could affect security. It definitely affects orchestrations, possibly the OMW server. That there's some different things to take a look at. So you still have unit testing. However, the line above unit testing is retrofits. So that's really important. Once we've run all the sequels, the retrofits that you're keeping, hopefully have a copy of the base object. Any new features in those base objects, we will retrofit into your custom objects. So that's really important that as each one of those is done, we do a quick unit test, make sure it's not blowing up, that it's functional, that all the custom features are still playing nicely together with maybe a new business function or something else that's come in. So that particular cycle does take quite a while. That bar spans and contrasts based on how many customizations you have. I have customers that have 30 customizations, and I have customers that have 3,500. So that bar will ebb and flow based on what is kept through the cycle. You have a secondary. Oh, go ahead, Paul.
Oh, no, please continue, Julie.
Okay. Then you've got ICRP, which is a secondary. This is a critically important testing cycle because it's integrated testing. So we do beginning to end processes that includes all your integrations, any third-party tools that's in that particular process. It will have vanilla programs, customized programs. So it truly is a beginning to end process for everything that's going on in your system. So that's also a critically important set. And then again, UAT on the back end, everything should be tested, all the bugs worked out. These are your very end users, again, still just doing a quick day in the life.
So we'll take this information, that technical debt that we were talking about before, what it is that your organization is trying to achieve. And we'll basically show two different options, the lift and shift that Julie was talking about, as well as the move and improve. Now, the best part about this is one of the other big obstacles for doing these type of projects is the cost of the migration itself. And Denovo will, at the end of the day, we'll do a no cost migration for you to the cloud if we're pairing that along with a 36-month managed services contract. And I'll be completely transparent about why we do that. Most of our customers that have been with us have been customers for more than 10 years. If we work with your organization and we prove ourselves, this is going to be a very long-term relationship. And this investment on the part of Denovo just makes absolute sense for us. So when we're doing the assessment, one of the areas that we focus on is availability. So what is the availability requirement for your organization? The best way to think about this is if JD Edwards goes down during the middle of a business day, what's the impact to your organization in dollars? If you're an accounting organization, if you're an organization and all you're using JD Edwards for is general ledger, AP, AR, maybe a little bit of procurement, an unexpected outage is going to make some accountants unhappy, but it's probably not the end of the world. Now, contrast that with a 24/7 global manufacturing organization. You're literally shutting down the business when this application goes down because all of your business processes are running through there. Hey, Julie, you were sharing a story with me the other day about one of your customers and the impact of their organization on downtime, just 1 hour of downtime. Could you share that story?
Sure. We had a vegetable manufacturer. They ran 24/7, multiple shifts during the peak of summer because these are fresh picked vegetables. They get picked in the field, they come into the warehouse, trucks are sitting there waiting. It's a very short time frame. If JD Edwards was down, it was anywhere between $80,000 to $100,000 loss in an hour because those trucks would leave and go somewhere else. And then those vegetables just sat.
So if we're sitting there and we do something from an architectural standpoint that avoids 5 hours of unplanned downtime a year for that organization, that's $500,000 of product they didn't throw away. That makes a really important context for us when we're thinking about how we want to go about designing availability. But at a high level, how we think about this is mean time to failure. So how often is something expected to fail based on published base rates times blast radius? Blast radius you can think of as what is the impact of that failure? And then MTTR, or mean time to recovery. How long does it take us to get everything back up and fully operational? And then internally, we use that to create a risk score. And then we can take all of those different options and see really where we need to be focusing our attention. So when I think about availability and I think about the base rates, a single VM typically on the cloud is going to have a published annual availability of about 99.9%. So if you look at that over a 5-year period, that's almost 44 hours of unplanned outage in a 5-year period. Most organizations that are global manufacturing, depending on what specific business processes they're running on, if a database, for example, is setting on that single VM, that might be an unacceptable number for them. They might be looking more geared towards an engineered solution. So on-prem today, they might be on an IBM I, where they're going to be looking at getting 4 nines or under 5 hours over a 5-year period. Or Exadata, which we're actually getting an extra 9 there, taking it down to less than an hour over a 5-year period in terms of outage. But all of this at the end of the day is going to be sitting inside of a data center. What do the availability characteristics of that data center look like? tier 4 data center, for example, is going to have an availability characteristic of 99.995%. So over a 5-year period, that means we're going to expect there's at least 2.2 hours of downtime. If the data center goes down, that means the Exadata also goes down. That means the VM hosts that are running in there have gone down, the VMs that are running go down. So all of that starts adding up. It's additive in nature. So you're basically taking those pieces and parts and you're assembling them together to get what your expected availability is on paper, and basically making sure that what you're doing from an architectural perspective, what we're recommending to you, is appropriate to your organization. So blast radius. So the big thing to know about blast radius is a concept of what's called a soft dependency and a hard dependency. So within JD Edwards, a soft dependency could best be thought of as your WebLogic servers. So you've got multiple WebLogic servers here. If any one of those servers goes down, JD Edwards itself is still up. Depending on how many WebLogic servers you have, you're going to have users that will have lost their session, lost whatever work they had in progress at that moment, but they're going to be able to immediately log back in. So that's an example of a soft dependency. A hard dependency might be that scenario we were just talking about where the database is running on top of a single VM. Now, when that database goes offline, all of JD Edwards is down. This WebLogic server may be up, but it's not working. Everything is down across the board. The blast radius, we look at it, is the percentage of users that are going to be impacted by that particular failure. In the meantime to recovery, how long does it take to get things back up and back recovered? So again, in the instance of a failed WebLogic server, let's say it's just an operating system style crash. Reboots, comes back online, very short period of time. Or maybe it's a problem that's associated with patching and it's a little bit more involved getting it back online. That's depending on the specific scenario, that's going to determine what that MTTR looks like. Again, in the database, if it's a simple OS failure, might require a reboot, or maybe it was the physical host failed, but things immediately come back up. An issue with patching might be a couple hours to resolve. Or how many of you all have ever had the situation with the rogue user that goes in and modifies data selection, deletes data selection, and instead of advancing a single work order, advances the status of every work order in the system? And now all of a sudden you're asking your DBAs to roll everything back to a couple milliseconds before that happened. How long does that recovery take? Because honestly, a lot of times those type of logical user issues that you're trying to recover from are actually more frequent occurrences than a physical hardware outage or something else going on with the database. So all of this aggregates together into this risk management framework. And we use that to determine what the appropriate architecture is for your organization. And then we'll use that to basically come back with generally 3 different options. The first option is going to look at taking JD Edwards to the cloud, but doing it in an economically, or in a manner that's optimized for the economics. The second version is going to be where it's a balance between the economics and performance. And then the third is where we're looking at engineered systems, things like Exadata, things like Oracle's DBCS, 2-node rack solutions, where we can take advantage of new advances in JD Edwards technology, things like kernel resiliency, where literally we can do patching on the systems without taking the systems down, keeping JD Edwards up, keeping it online. And then we'll take those options, we'll pull them all together into the architecture that we're presenting back to you. So Julie, going back to that move and improve plan that we were talking about before, one of the things I run into a lot of times are these large testing windows that are out here. We talked about unit testing before, we talked about ICRP, and we talked about UAT. And a lot of times the conversations I'll have with organizations is we want to move JD Edwards to the cloud, but we've also got a lot of other strategic initiatives going on within our organization. And because of those initiatives, we can't do this. We can't take our end users away from these other business strategically important items to focus on doing this migration. Our executive management is, even though this all makes sense on paper, our executive management does not want to do this. Can you talk about what we're doing for organizations to solve that problem?
Absolutely, and I love this. So we will take your JDE test scripts for you and do the testing for unit and ICRP. So the longest time frames that need human input, we're going to cover most of that for you and just let you handle the user acceptance testing, which is typically all done within a week, where the retrofit and unit testing in ICRP can be very long testing cycles.
So the unit testing and ICRP, if we go back, those were the really long ones. UAT was pretty short.
They are, and it's critical because especially the unit testing, we are testing, newly developed and promoted objects that have changes to them. So typically there are bugs here and there. So we're handling all that back and forth also. That does take quite a bit of time. So your users who have day jobs, they won't necessarily be involved in any of that until they get to UAT. We may have questions for business analysts, things like that, but your team doesn't have to be heads down and engaged for those first two long cycles.
So one of the things I often will joke with customers about is JD Edwards is always the easy part of the projects. The JD Edwards, you've got to go through the testing. It's absolutely critical for your organizations that this happens. But at the end of the day, the functionality is just going to work. Oracle does a phenomenal job with release management for the product. You might occasionally run into the odd tools bug, but that's about it. The complexity of the project always has to do with integrations, interfaces, and third-party products. Julie, can you talk a little bit about what we're doing there to help in that arena as well?
Yeah, so most of us in the JDE community have third-party products that are bolted on. So as you can see the list here, Vertex, all of the gun scanners for warehousing and different reporting tools that are embedded. We will also test all of that for you. Most of our customers have almost all of these in some sense or another. So we're used to testing and working with these third-party vendors, as well as doing testing on how they should run, how data should be importing or exporting or displaying in JD Edwards. So we will test all your third parties as well.
So what about interfaces between systems, maybe other cloud systems that are out there?
Absolutely. So you can see a quick list here. A lot of these may be old import export, or they might even be orchestrations where the Salesforce is talking directly to JD Edwards through an orchestration. So we will test all of this for you. It includes this. I've had customers that have banking files that are exported using Orchestrator. The banking files head over to the bank, then a file comes back with check numbers and stuff like that that they've accepted. So we will test all of this as well. And this is huge because it does take a big amount of time. It involves other people on the outside making sure that files are being received. So we will handle all of this for you as well.
Launch Liaison, this is an aspect of LaunchPerfect that I'm really excited about. It's something I think that makes a lot of difference to customers. Can you talk some about this, Julie?
Yes, and I love this. When I worked for JD Edwards, we were always on site for go live. So this was back in the 90s. We didn't have laptops and ways to communicate that was easier, but I think being on site is missed now. So end users are nervous at go lives, especially when some things have changed. So you've got a warm body there who can make all the phone calls, make sure we have the right people on the phone if something's going wrong, that it truly is a warm body standing there making sure that everything is going well. I love it because I actually like being on site with customers, seeing what they do for a living and how they're using JD Edwards. But this is an amazing aspect of each project. So we will be there on site with you to make sure everything's going smoothly.
And depending on the nature of the customer themselves, we sometimes will have internal fights about who gets to be the launch liaison. So for instance, organizations that are in the wine industry, for example, we almost have to have an internal lottery to determine who gets to go. So that's LaunchPerfect. Our motto is we sweat the details so you don't have to. And literally we do sweat the details. Sam or Alana, are there any questions from the audience?
None right now, but if anybody has any questions, please feel free to type them in and we'll be sure to answer them.
All right, thanks everyone. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you so much.